I just wanted to make some final comments about the final exam. So I will ask some harder questions, like I've said. Not harder questions than your homework problems necessarily, but harder questions than previous exams. So on your midterms, those have been extremely time constrained, and so I try to ask you questions that if you've been on top of everything, you would sort of immediately know how to answer. I don't think that would be appropriate for an exam where you're not time constrained, because the exam just wouldn't tell me anything. Everybody would get 100%. Okay, so that would be good and bad, kind of. So I will ask some harder questions, but that doesn't mean I'm going to try to test you on new skills that you have not developed yet. That doesn't mean I'm going to require you to learn something new that you haven't learned in the course during the exam. No, it means I'm going to ask you to use old skills, old things that you should have picked up from doing your homework problems, and apply those skills to handle a new situation that maybe you have not seen before. All right, so that's the plan for the exam, and it's not going to be long. So one way that you can be comfortable knowing that it will not be long is that I don't have a TA for this course. So whatever I make, I have to grade, and I don't really want to grade that much. I also want to start my spring break, just like you guys. So it's not going to be long. The reason you've got a 36-hour time block is just for your convenience, so that you can be more flexible in when you sit down to do it, or when you meet up with people, if you're going to meet up with people to work on it, if that's something you want to do. And speaking of that, if you're not comfortable meeting up with people in person, or if you just don't have any friends in the course, and you feel disadvantaged that some people get to work together and you might not, you're welcome to make contacts with people in any way you want, including CampusWire. Apparently there's some chat rooms feature that I have not really used very much, but you guys can make chat rooms or whatever, or you can just share contact info and then set up your remote meetings in any way that you want. Okay, so what about studying? So what I would recommend for studying, so you might not need to study if you've just been on top of everything, you've been following everything, which I would assume is the case if this is the only course you're taking this quarter, but that's, I think, not the case for anyone. But if you're just good and you're on top of everything, you don't really need to study, except maybe the newer stuff. Do homework 10. Everyone should do homework 10, even though that's not graded. If you feel that you really need to study, I would recommend, make sure you do go back and do any homework problems that you haven't done, including the ungraded ones. So those are there for your practice. And that's kind of the pool of skills that I'll be drawing from to try to create the final exam questions. So you'll be studying straight from the source material that I'm using for the exam. And if those are all done, then what else is there to do? I guess you can make sure you're familiar with all of the theorems that we've gone over. Not just that you know them as facts. Knowing them as facts is not even very helpful because it's an open book exam, so you can look up anything you want at any time. But make sure that you've sort of internalized them. So how can you internalize a theorem? Well, my suggestion is, or this is just one way to go, as you're going back and reviewing the theorems, for each theorem, try to think of a non-trivial example of that theorem working, and then look at the hypotheses of the theorem and try to find examples that demonstrate why the hypotheses are needed. So if you do that for every theorem, then I think you will really develop a good intuition for which theorem is useful in which situation. So for example, we just went over the Cauchy integral theorem for star domains. One thing you can do is find an example of a star domain and find an non-trivial analytic function and observe the Cauchy integral theorem working. Maybe even better would be to check the importance of the star domain hypothesis. Can you find an example of a non-star domain where you have some analytic function which does not have an antiderivative? So that sort of thing. You can try to do that for a lot of theorems. I think that would be a good way to internalize the theorems.